December 8, 1980, the Dakota Building, New York City, 7:47 p.m. A knock on the door. Not just any knock. 3 sharp raps that cut through the silence like a blade through silk. John Lennon was sitting at his piano, working on a melody that had been haunting him for weeks. Yoko was in the studio downstairs. Sean was already asleep in his room, the soft glow of his nightlight spilling into the hallway. Everything was quiet. Everything was peaceful. Everything was about to change. The knock came again, harder this time, more insistent. John looked up from the piano, his fingers frozen above the keys. Nobody knocked at this hour. Nobody got past the front desk without being announced. The Dakota had security for a reason: privacy, protection from the endless stream of fans and reporters who wanted a piece of him. He stood slowly, a strange feeling settling in his chest, something between curiosity and dread. Through the peephole, he saw a figure standing in the dim hallway light. Young, thin, familiar, in a way that made his heart skip. John's hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. When he opened the door, the world stopped spinning. Standing there, soaking wet from the December rain, was an 18-year-old boy with eyes that mirrored his own. Julian Lennon, his son. The son he hadn't seen in over 3 years. "Hello, Dad," Julian said, his voice barely above a whisper. John couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The hallway stretched between them like an ocean. Behind Julian, a neighbor's door cracked open slightly. Mrs. Weinstein from 72, always curious, always watching. She saw John's face, the color draining, the shock freezing him in place, and quietly closed her door again. Even she knew, some moments are too private for witnesses. "Can I come in?" Julian asked. Those 5 words carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken conversations. 3 years of silence, 3 years of missed calls. 3 years of a father who had chosen a new life over his old one. John stepped aside without a word. Julian walked past him into the apartment, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood floor. He didn't look back, didn't wait for permission. He walked in like a ghost returning to a house that had forgotten him. The door closed with a soft click that echoed through the entire building. Outside, the December rain fell harder. Inside, the silence was deafening. John stood there, staring at his son's back, and for the first time in years, he felt something he'd been running from his entire life: shame. Julian stood in the center of the living room, dripping rainwater onto the Persian rug. He looked around slowly, taking in everything: the grand piano, the expensive art on the walls, the view of Central Park through the massive windows, the evidence of a life lived in luxury, a life he'd never been part of. "Nice place," Julian said, his voice flat, emotionless. John closed the door and turned to face him. "Julian, how did I get past security?" Julian finished the sentence. "I told them I was your son, showed them my passport. Funny thing, we have the same last name." The sarcasm cut deeper than any scream could have. John ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Julian remembered from childhood. "Does your mother know you're here?" "Mum thinks I'm at a friend's house in Liverpool." Julian turned to face him fully now. "I flew out yesterday, took all the money I'd saved from working at the record shop, spent it on a ticket to New York because I needed to know." "Know what?" "If you're real." The words hung in the air like smoke. Julian's eyes were wet, but not from the rain. "If you're actually the person I've been defending to everyone back home. If you're the father who writes songs about peace and love, but can't pick up a phone to call his own son." John felt his throat tighten. "Julian, it's complicated." "Don't." Julian's voice cracked. "Don't give me that. I've heard it from Aunt Mimi, from Mum's friends, from the tabloids. Everyone has an excuse for you. But I came here because I wanted to hear it from you." John opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? That he'd been afraid? That starting over with Yoko and Sean had felt like a chance to be a better father, even if it meant abandoning his first attempt? That every time he thought about calling, the guilt paralyzed him. The truth was too ugly to speak aloud. Julian walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. I used to tell the kids at school that you were busy, that you were changing the world. That's why you couldn't visit. That's why you missed my birthdays, my school plays, my graduation. He turned back to John, and the pain in his eyes was unbearable. But you weren't changing the world, were you? You were just here, living your life, raising Sean, being the father to him that you never were to me. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John finally found his voice. You're right. 2 words. Simple. Devastating. Julian wasn't expecting that. He'd prepared for excuses, for defensiveness, for the same charm that John used to deflect uncomfortable questions in interviews. But not honesty. I failed you, John continued, his voice rough. I was a terrible father. I was selfish and scared, and I convinced myself that distance was better than repeating the same mistakes my father made with me. So you made different mistakes instead, Julian said quietly. Yes. The apartment was so quiet they could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, worn and creased from being opened and refolded dozens of times. He held it out to John. This came to Mum's house 6 months ago, from a lawyer in London. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. John took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, legal documents outlining a trust fund, provisions for Julian's future, financial arrangements that John had made through intermediaries, blood money, guilt payments, love expressed through accountants instead of presents. You've been sending money, Julian said, making sure I'm taken care of. Making sure Mum doesn't have to struggle. That's something, I suppose. Julian, but that's not what I came here for. Julian's voice was steady now, strong. I didn't fly across the ocean to talk about money. I came because there's something you need to know, something I've been carrying for 2 years, and Mum made me promise not to tell you because she said it would just be another burden for you to ignore. John's face paled. What is it? Julian took a deep breath. Remember when I was 15? When I got really sick and Mum told your people it was just the flu? Yes, it wasn't the flu. The room tilted. I had meningitis, nearly died, was in the hospital for 3 weeks. Mum called your manager, called Aunt Mimi, left messages with Yoko's assistant. No one told you. Or maybe they did and you chose not to come. I don't know which is worse. John felt his knees go weak. He grabbed the back of the sofa for support. I woke up on the 8th day, Julian continued, his voice breaking now. The doctors said it was a miracle. Mum was there, holding my hand. She'd been there every single day, sleeping in a chair next to my bed. When I asked where you were, she lied. She said you were on tour, that you didn't know, that you'd come as soon as you heard. Tears streamed down Julian's face, but he didn't wipe them away. I knew she was lying. I was 15, not 5, but I let her lie because it was easier than admitting the truth. That my own father didn't care enough to come see if I lived or died. John was crying now too. Julian, I swear I didn't know. It doesn't matter if you knew. Julian's voice rose, the anger finally breaking through. Don't you understand? You should have known. You should have been in my life enough to know when I was sick, when I needed you, when I was lying in a hospital bed wondering if I'd ever see 17. The outburst echoed through the apartment. Somewhere down the hall, Sean's door opened slightly. The 5-year-old boy peeked out, saw the strange teenager yelling at his father, and quickly closed the door again. Julian wiped his eyes roughly with his sleeve. I survived, obviously. Came out of it with some hearing loss in my left ear and a fear of hospitals that I'll probably never get over. But I survived. He looked at John with an expression that was somehow both broken and fierce. And I promised myself that if I did, I'd come here one day. I'd look you in the eye and tell you exactly what your absence cost me. Not just the hospital, everything. Every birthday you missed. Every school achievement you didn't celebrate. Every night I went to bed wondering what I did wrong to make my father disappear. John sank onto the sofa, his face in his hands. Julian stood over him. This 17-year-old boy who'd crossed an ocean to confront the man who'd given him life, but never a childhood. So now you know, Julian said softly. Now you know what you missed while you were here playing happy family with your second chance. The silence that followed was broken by a voice from the hallway. John? Yoko stood in the doorway, her face registering shock as she took in the scene. The wet teenager, John's tears, the tension thick enough to suffocate. This is Julian, John said, his voice hollow. Yoko's expression shifted through several emotions in seconds: surprise, understanding, then something that looked almost like guilt. Julian, hello, I didn't know you were visiting. I'm not visiting, Julian said coldly. I'm confronting. Yoko looked at John, then back at Julian. Would you like some tea? You're soaking wet. Let me get you. I don't want tea. Julian's voice was sharp. I want answers. Yoko nodded slowly and retreated to the kitchen, understanding this was not her conversation to have. John finally looked up at his son. Ask me anything. Why? One word, 1,000 meanings. Why did you leave? Why did you stop calling? Why was it so easy for you to forget I existed? John took a shaky breath. It wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I convinced myself it was necessary. Necessary for what? For survival. John's voice was raw now, stripped of all pretense. When your mother and I split, I was drowning. Drugs, alcohol, anger. I was becoming my own father. Violent, absent, cruel. I looked at you one day and I saw fear in your eyes. Fear of me. And I knew I had to get away before I destroyed you the way my father destroyed me. Julian was quiet, listening. So I ran, John continued. I told myself I was protecting you, that you were better off without me than with the version of me I was becoming. But the truth? I was a coward. I was running from my own guilt, my own failures. And the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to come back. You could have tried. I know. You could have called. I know. You could have been there when I almost died. John's voice broke. I know. The weight of those 3 words, I know, filled the apartment. Outside, the December night had fully settled over New York. The Dakota's old walls held the conversation like a confessional, absorbing the pain and anger and regret that leaked from every word. In apartment 72, Mrs. Weinstein pressed her ear against the wall. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the emotion, the raised voices, the long silences, the sound of 2 people trying to bridge an unbridgeable distance. She would later tell her daughter, I heard John Lennon's heart breaking that night. I heard it shatter into a million pieces. In the kitchen, Yoko sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. She could hear everything, every accusation, every confession, every moment of the reckoning she'd known would come eventually. She'd met Julian once, years ago, when he was just a child. She'd seen the way he looked at his father with such hope and love, and she'd watched as John built a new life that had no room for the remnants of his old one. She'd told herself it wasn't her place to interfere, But she'd always known this day would come. Back in the living room, Julian sat down in the chair across from John. The anger was draining out of him, replaced by exhaustion. "Mum said I shouldn't come here," Julian said quietly. "She said it would only hurt me more, that you'd make promises you wouldn't keep, or worse, that you wouldn't care at all." "What do you think?" John asked. "Now that you're here?" Julian studied his father's face, the famous face that was on album covers and magazine covers and posters in teenage bedrooms around the world. But stripped of the image, stripped of the legend, it was just the face of a broken man. "I think," Julian said slowly, "that you're exactly as messed up as Mum said you were. But I also think you actually do care. You're just terrible at showing it." John let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "That might be the most accurate thing anyone's ever said about me." "So what now?" Julian asked. It was the question that hung over everything. What happens when the abandoned son confronts the absent father? What happens when years of pain and neglect are finally spoken aloud? What happens when the truth is too heavy to carry, but too important to put down? John looked at his son, really looked at him for the first time in years. He saw Cynthia's eyes and his own stubborn jaw. He saw a boy who'd grown into a young man without him. He saw all the birthdays he'd missed, crystallized in the height and maturity of this stranger who was his son. "I don't know," John admitted. "I don't know what happens now, but I know what I want to happen." "What's that?" "I want to know you, not the idea of you that I've been carrying around in my head. Not the child you were when I last saw you, but you, the person you've become despite me." Julian's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple. I know. You can't just snap your fingers and undo 3 years of silence. I know. I might never forgive you." John's voice was barely a whisper. "I know." Julian stood up and walked to the piano. He ran his fingers across the keys without pressing them down, just feeling the smoothness of the ivory and ebony. "You were working on something when I knocked," he said. "I heard it through the door." John nodded. "A new piece. Can't quite finish it. Play it for me." It was a request and a challenge. John hesitated, then walked to the piano. He sat down on the bench, and Julian stood beside him, exactly as he used to do when he was 5 years old, before everything fell apart. John's fingers found the keys. The melody that emerged was haunting, melancholic, full of yearning for something lost. As he played, John began to speak. "When you were 3, he said, his fingers never stopping, "you used to wake up early, 4 in the morning sometimes. You'd climb out of your crib and come into our bedroom. You wouldn't cry or make noise. You'd just stand there until I woke up." Julian listened, the music washing over him. "And I'd take you downstairs," John continued, "and we'd sit at the piano, just like this. I'd play, and you'd watch my hands like they were performing magic. You'd put your tiny fingers on top of mine, trying to make the music with me. The melody shifted, becoming softer, more tender. Those were the best hours of my life," John said, his voice breaking. "Those quiet mornings when it was just us and the music, before the world woke up, before the expectations and the pressure and the constant need to be someone I wasn't." He played a few more notes, then stopped. "I think about those mornings every day," John said, "and every day I hate myself a little more for walking away from them." "From you." Julian's hand trembled as he reached out and placed it on the piano, next to his father's. "I remember," Julian whispered. "I still remember those mornings." John looked at his son's hand, larger now, almost the same size as his own, and something inside him shattered completely. He pulled Julian into an embrace so fierce it knocked the breath from both of them. And for the first time in 3 years, John Lennon held his eldest son. Julian's body went rigid at first, fighting against the embrace, fighting against the forgiveness his heart wanted to give but his mind said he shouldn't. But then he collapsed into his father's arms, and they both broke. The tears came in waves. Years of absence, years of abandonment, years of love that had nowhere to go but inward, where it festered and hurt and scarred. All of it poured out in that living room. Yoko heard it from the kitchen and quietly closed the door to give them privacy. Mrs. Weinstein heard it through the wall and wiped her own tears, thinking about her own son who she hadn't spoken to in months, over some petty argument she couldn't even remember now. And somewhere in the building, other neighbors heard it too. The sound of two people trying to find each other again across a canyon of hurt. When they finally pulled apart, both their faces were wet and swollen. "I'm so sorry," John said, over and over. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "I know," Julian said. "I know you are." "I want to try," John said desperately. "I want to be better. I want to know you. Please, Julian, please give me a chance." Julian wiped his eyes. "I didn't come here for promises. Promises don't mean anything. I came here for truth, and you gave me that. That's more than I expected." "What does that mean?" Julian took a shaky breath. "It means I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I can try to understand you, and maybe that's a start." He looked at his father with eyes that were older than 17, eyes that had seen too much hurt too young. "I'm not a child anymore," Julian said. "Dus, I'm not the little boy who stood at this piano waiting for you to teach him music. I've had to grow up on my own, figure out who I am without you. And that person, he's not sure he needs a father anymore." The words hit John like physical blows. "But," Julian continued, his voice softer now, "that person might want to know the man who gave him life. Not as a father, maybe not even as family, but as someone, something. I don't know what, but something." John nodded, unable to speak. "So here's what I'm offering," Julian said. "I'm staying in New York for 3 more days. I have a hotel near Times Square. If you want to try, really try, then meet me for breakfast tomorrow, 9 a.m., that diner on the corner of 42nd and 8th, the one that's open all night." "I'll be there," John said immediately. "Don't make promises," Julian warned. "Just show up or don't. But know this, if you don't show up, that's the end. I won't chase you anymore. I won't hope anymore. I'll go back to Liverpool, finish school, live my life, and you'll be nothing more than a name on my birth certificate and a voice on records that I probably won't listen to anymore." The ultimatum hung in the air. Julian picked up his jacket from where he dropped it by the door. 9 a.m., he repeated. "Don't be late." He opened the door to leave, then paused. "One more thing," Julian said, not turning around. "That song you were playing when I got here, the one you can't finish, it's beautiful, but it's sad, like you're mourning something. Maybe finish it, maybe don't. But either way, I think I know what it's about now." He left. The door closed behind him. John stood alone in his living room, the rain outside matching the tears on his face. In the kitchen, Yoko emerged and found him standing there, staring at the closed door. "Will you go?" she asked quietly. John looked at her. "If I don't, I'll never forgive myself." "And if you do?" "Then maybe," John said, his voice barely audible. "Maybe I can start learning how to forgive myself anyway." December 9th, 1980, 8:47 a.m. John Lennon sat in a booth at the back of the diner, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee. He'd been there since 8:15, unable to wait, unable to risk being late. The diner was the kind of place that existed in every city. Worn vinyl booths, checkered floors, coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since 1952. The morning crowd was a mix of taxi drivers, nurses coming off night shifts, and insomniacs who'd never gone to bed. Nobody noticed John. Or if they did, they were New York enough not to care. He watched the door. Every time it opened, his heart jumped. 8:51, 8:54, 8:57. At 8:59, John started to panic. What if Julian didn't come? What if last night had been too much, too painful, too raw? What if this was Julian's way of showing him what abandonment felt like? At 9:02, the door opened. Julian walked in, scanning the diner until his eyes landed on John. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Julian walked over and slid into the booth across from him. "You came," Julian said. "Of course I came. Mom bet me 20 quid that you wouldn't show." John's face fell. "She really thinks that little of me?" Julian shrugged. "Can you blame her?" "No." A waitress appeared, 50-ish, with kind eyes and a name tag that read Dolores. She poured Julian a coffee without asking and refreshed John's cup. "You boys want breakfast?" she asked. They ordered mechanically. Eggs, toast, bacon. Neither of them actually hungry, but needing something to do with their hands. When Dolores walked away, the silence settled between them again. "I didn't sleep last night," Julian said finally. "Kept thinking about whether I should come, whether you'd actually be here." "I didn't sleep either," John admitted. "Spent the whole night thinking about what to say to you." "And what did you come up with?" John smiled sadly. "Nothing good enough." Julian took a sip of his coffee and made a face. "This is terrible." "Yeah, it's perfect." And somehow, that broke the tension. They talked slowly at first, carefully, like two people learning a new language. John asked about school, about Liverpool, about music. Julian answered in short sentences, still guarded, still testing to see if this was real or another performance. But gradually, as the eggs arrived and the toast got cold and Dolores refilled their cups twice more, something shifted. Julian told John about his band. 3 friends from school who were serious about making music. They practiced in a garage and played pubs on weekends for £20 and free beer. "We're not good yet," Julian said, "but we're getting there. I write some songs, play guitar. Nothing like what you did, but it's mine, you know?" John's eyes lit up. "You write? Can I hear something?" Julian hesitated, then pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket pocket. He flipped through pages of crossed-out lyrics and rough chord progressions until he found one. "It's called Empty Rooms," Julian said, sliding the notebook across the table. John read the lyrics slowly. "Empty rooms where laughter used to live. Photographs of moments I can't forgive. You're somewhere across the ocean wide, while I'm learning how to put away my pride." The words punched John in the chest. "Julian," he whispered, this is really good." "It's about you," Julian said flatly. "In case that wasn't obvious. I know. Most of my songs are about you. Anger, hurt, questions that don't have answers. My bandmates say I should write about other things. Girls, politics, anything else. But it all comes back to this." John slid the notebook back. "Maybe that's what you need to do. Write it all out. Get it out of you. Then you can move on to other things." "Maybe," Julian said. "Or maybe I'll spend my whole life writing about the father who wasn't there. Make a career out of it. Generational trauma sells records, right?" It was said with dark humor, but the pain underneath was real. John flinched. "I deserve that." "Yeah, you do." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Julian said something that surprised both of them. "Tell me about Sean." John looked up sharply. "What?" "Sean, your other son, my half-brother. Tell me about him." John didn't know what to say. Was this a trap? A test? "I want to know," Julian insisted. "I want to know what kind of father you are to him. The father you couldn't be to me." John took a breath. "He's 5. Funny. Smart. Obsessed with dinosaurs. He wakes me up every morning by jumping on the bed and demanding pancakes." "Do you make them?" "Every time." "Do you take him to the park?" 3 times a week. "Do you read him bedtime stories?" "Every night." Julian nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "So you can be a good father. You just chose to be one for him and not for me." "It's not that simple." "It really is, though." Julian's voice was controlled, but barely. "You had 2 sons. You chose one. That's as simple as it gets." John couldn't argue with that. I don't hate Sean, Julian said quietly. That's not what this is about. He didn't ask to be born any more than I did. It's not his fault that you decided he deserved a father and I didn't. Julian. But I do envy him. Julian continued. I envy that he gets the mornings at the piano. The bedtime stories, the pancakes. He gets all the things I used to dream about when I was his age. John's voice was rough. What can I do? Tell me what I can do to make this right. You can't, Julian said simply. You can't go back in time. You can't give me those years back. You can't fix it. Then what do you want from me? Julian looked at his father with eyes that were too old, too tired, too hurt. I want you to acknowledge it, he said. Not just to me, to everyone. I want you to stop pretending like your past doesn't exist because it's inconvenient. I want you to tell people that you have 2 sons, not just one. I want Sean to know he has a brother. I want the world to know that John Lennon, the man who preaches about love and peace, couldn't even love his own firstborn child enough to stay in his life. The truth landed like a bomb. I want you to own your failures, Julian said. Not hide from them. Not make excuses for them. Just own them. John was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. Okay. I'll do it. I'll find a way to do it. You're right. You've always been right, and I've been a coward for not admitting it. Julian didn't look satisfied. He didn't look relieved. He just looked tired. I fly back tomorrow, Julian said. I've got school on Monday and a gig on Friday. Life goes on. Can I see you again before you go? Julian thought about it. There's a record store on Bleecker Street. I went there yesterday. They have an amazing vinyl collection. Meet me there at 3 p.m. We can look at records. Talk or not talk. Whatever. I'll be there. Don't make me regret this, Julian warned. I won't. Julian stood up, dropping a $20 bill on the table. That's for my breakfast. I pay my own way now. He started to leave, then turned back. One more thing, Julian said. If you're serious about being in my life, even just a little bit, then you need to know something. I'm not going to forgive you just because you show up a few times. I'm not going to forget everything because you're being nice now. This is going to be hard and messy and probably painful for both of us. I understand. Good. Julian pulled his jacket tighter against the cold. See you at 3. He walked out of the diner. John sat there alone, Dolores refilling his coffee again without a word. Outside, December in New York was cold and unforgiving. But inside that diner, something small and fragile had been planted. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not healing, but maybe, just maybe, the possibility of all 3. 3:17 p.m., Bleecker Street. Julian was already browsing through the folk section when John walked in, breathless from running the last 3 blocks. You're late, Julian said without looking up. Subway delay, I'm sorry. 17 minutes late. I know, I'm sorry. Julian finally looked at him. Punctuality matters. It shows respect. Remember that. John nodded, chastened. They spent the next 2 hours surrounded by records. They talked about music, Dylan, the Stones, bands Julian loved that John had never heard of. They debated whether vinyl really sounded better than cassettes. They argued about which Beatles album was the best. Julian said Rubber Soul. John said Revolver. They agreed to disagree. For a few hours, they weren't father and son. They were just 2 people who loved music. As the afternoon faded into evening, they walked through the village together. The streets were alive with the kind of energy that only New York in December has. The cold air, the Christmas lights, the sense that anything could happen. I spoke to Yoko this morning, John said as they walked. Told her everything. She thinks Sean should meet you. Julian stopped walking. What? Before you leave. Tomorrow, if you want. No pressure. But he's your brother. He should know you exist. Julian was quiet for a long moment. Does he know about me? He's 5. He knows I was married before. He knows he has a brother somewhere. But we haven't We haven't talked about it much, because that would require you to acknowledge your past. Yes, Julian started walking again. I'll think about it. They walked in silence until they reached Washington Square Park. The arch was lit up, and street musicians were playing despite the cold. Can I ask you something? John said. You've been asking me things all day. This is different. John took a breath. If I had died without you ever coming here, without us ever having this conversation, what would you have done? Julian looked at him sharply. Why would you ask that? Because I need to know. I need to know what I almost lost. Julian sat down on a bench, and John sat beside him. I would have gone to your funeral, Julian said quietly. Stood in the back, not because I wanted to say goodbye, but because I needed to see that you were really gone, that there was no chance left. He looked up at the winter sky, and then I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if things could have been different, if I could have changed something, if I should have tried harder to reach you. Julian, but now I don't have to wonder, Julian interrupted, because I came here. I said everything I needed to say. I looked you in the eye and told you exactly how much you hurt me. And you looked back and admitted it. He turned to John. So if you died tomorrow, I'd still be sad. I'd still have regrets, but I wouldn't have that wondering, that what if, and that's worth something. John felt tears forming again. I don't want to die with this between us. Then don't, Julian said simply. Live, change, be better, not just for me, for yourself, for Sean, for Yoko, for everyone whose life you touch. I don't know if I can. Yes, you do, Julian said firmly. You wrote songs that changed the world. You made people think differently about war and peace and love. If you can do that for millions of strangers, you can do it for one son. John looked at this 17-year-old boy who had become a man without him. When did you get so wise? John asked. When I had to raise myself, Julian replied. December 10th, 1980. 11 a.m. The Dakota Building. Julian stood outside, looking up at the famous Gothic facade. This time, he wasn't soaking wet. This time, he wasn't angry. This time, he knew what waited for him inside. John met him in the lobby. With him was a small boy with dark hair and curious eyes. Sean, John said gently, this is Julian, your brother. Sean looked up at this tall teenager with big eyes. Hi. Hi, Julian said softly. Do you like dinosaurs? Sean asked. Julian smiled. I do. I have a stegosaurus. Want to see it? I'd love to. They went upstairs together, John, his two sons, and the ghost of all the years between them. Yoko had made tea and cookies. She was gracious and quiet, understanding that her presence was necessary, but her participation was not. Julian spent 2 hours with Sean, looking at dinosaur toys, reading books, playing simple games, and watching them together. John saw what he'd been too blind to see before. Family isn't just the people you choose to keep close. It's also the people you pushed away, who had every right to disappear, but chose to return anyway. When it was time for Julian to leave for the airport, the goodbye was different than it had been 3 days ago. I'll call you, John said, once a week, Sunday evenings, 7 p.m. your time. Don't make promises. I'm not promising, John interrupted. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. If I miss a call, I'll call the next day. If I'm traveling, I'll call from wherever I am. No more disappearing. Julian nodded slowly. Okay. And I want you to come back. Summer, maybe. Spend a week, 2 weeks, however long you can. I want to know you, Julian. I want to be something in your life. We'll see. It wasn't much, but it was something. They hugged goodbye, awkward still, but real. As Julian's taxi pulled away, John stood on the sidewalk, watching until it disappeared around the corner. Mrs. Weinstein from 72 was coming back from the market. She saw John standing there and stopped beside him. Was that your son? She asked. Yes, John said. My oldest. He looks like you. He's better than me. Mrs. Weinstein patted his arm. Then you did something right. 3 months later, John Lennon gave an interview to Rolling Stone. The reporter asked about his time away from music, about being a house husband, about his relationship with Sean. And for the first time in years, John Lennon told the truth. "I have 2 sons," he said, "Sean, who's 5, and Julian, who's 18 now. And I failed Julian. For years, I wasn't there. I made excuses. I hid from my responsibility because I was afraid of being the father my father was. But in running from that fear, I became someone almost as bad, someone absent." The reporter was silent, shocked by the honesty. "I'm trying to make amends," John continued. "I call Julian every Sunday. We talk. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, but we're talking, and that's more than we had before." "What made you decide to reconnect?" the reporter asked. John smiled sadly. "He showed up at my door and forced me to look at what I'd done. He gave me a chance I didn't deserve, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that chance." The interview ran in April 1981. Julian read it in his flat in Liverpool. He cried, not because the words fixed everything, but because they were a start. Years later, when people asked Julian Lennon about his relationship with his father, he would always say the same thing. "We didn't have a perfect ending. We didn't get a fairy tale reconciliation. But we got something real. We got honesty. We got effort. We got late-night phone calls where we talked about music and life and all the things we'd missed. We got Sunday dinners when I visited New York. We got a relationship built not on fantasy, but on truth." "Was it enough?" they'd ask. "It was something," Julian would reply. "And sometimes something is everything." The Dakota building still stands on 72nd Street. And if you listen closely on a quiet December night, neighbors say you can still hear the echo of that conversation. The one where a son came home, and a father finally understood what he'd lost. And both of them chose to try anyway. Because that's what love is. Not perfection, not absence of pain, but the choice to keep trying, even when it would be easier to walk away. Even when the hurt runs deep. Even when the years can't be recovered. Even when the relationship will always carry scars. Some wounds don't heal, but they can be tended. And that tending is its own kind of love. The end.